Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of the Nonprofit Show. Great to see you, Tony Bell.
It's great to see you, Julia. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. We're going to be talking about something that's a little dicey today about building your fundraising confidence. And I think sometimes it's really hard to admit that maybe you're not feeling it.
Mm.
And yet you got to go out there and really be confident about what you're doing. And so this is a great follow up to our episode last week, which was building your professional value. We talked a lot about what are the things that you can do to elevate your place within the profession, within your organization, and your community. But then this is a little bit nuanced. And so we are really excited to be jumping in on this. We have amazing partners that allow us to have this conversation. If you were with us last week, last Friday was our 1,600th episode of the Nonprofit Show. And what a joy to celebrate it with Tony on Fundraisers Friday. Our presenting sponsors include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Third Sector Company, and your part-time controller. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, joined by Mr. Tony Bell, to Mr. Nonprofit Consultancy, Mr. one of the great thought leaders in the nonprofit sector in our nation. And so what a joy it is every Friday to get to chat with him. So let's hit it out of the park. The first one, confidence is a skill.
Confidence is a skill, and like any skill, you have to practice it
Okay.
in order to perfect it. And the practice really comes, that's a lot of what we're going to talk about in today's conversation is how do we practice confidence building and what are some of the things that we can be doing to build our confidence in this work. It's super important. We're going to talk about no's and the abundance of yeses that exist also in this space. But yeah, confidence is a skill, something that you develop and build. A lot of it is, what's the word? How do I want to put this? A lot of it is up to you and the way that you build your own confidence and your own space within the nonprofit fundraising sector. And then part of it is how much you allow others to get into that space to build your confidence and the different ways that you receive that information. I know for myself, sometimes even in the conversations with you, Julia, you're so kind and building me up. And sometimes I'm like, no, don't say it. I can't take
I
it.
know. I
And so
know.
sometimes we're just not good at even just receiving, the messages that do indeed build our confidence, which is different than ego.
Yeah, it's really funny because I have noticed that. And when I say that, it's like super genuine. It's super genuine when I say that. And I think I mentioned this last week. We were on an episode with a guest and you were co-hosting that day. And I think off camera, I said, look, you need to connect with Tony Bell. He's like the real deal. And I could tell you were squirming. And it was really and then I felt badly, but then I was like, I didn't know how to get out of it because it was a genuine. I just think the way I see you is the way it is and the way
Yeah.
everybody should see you, right? And so I was just like, oh man, I felt kind of badly, but then I was like, well, keep going, sister, because it was really important. You said something really magical, and I want to just go back to it. You said that you're responsible for this in essence, this level of confidence.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree we are responsible, and we need to, again, like I said, just embrace when positive reinforcement comes our way. Don't think, oh, I don't deserve it, or it's not genuine. Receive it and own it and grow from it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, I love that we're having this conversation because I think sometimes we we don't know where this comes from, especially when we're observing others. I think a lot of times, I was just at an AFP chapter meeting last week, and I looked around the room, and there was a difference of the people that were more confident, that were more, I think sometimes we use the word leader, but that's not really the right word.
Mhm.
But confident, like who was leading in that confident way. And I knew we were doing this show, and so I was maybe more attuned to it, and I thought it was just fascinating to see it. One of the things that we talk about, and you have brought this up a lot over the years, is that when you know your mission better than anyone, that's a confidence booster. Can you talk to us more about that?
Yeah, well, it's really important, I think, when you are a fundraising professional or a leader of a nonprofit. I mean, hopefully there is a culture of philanthropy throughout the whole organization, but certainly within different roles, it's more important than anyone else that you really know the mission and impact of your organization. Now you're like, well, yes, of course I know that. How does that build confidence? Well, it builds confidence because you feel assured and prepared for conversations that you might have with potential donors and investors. So you need to be able to tell the stories, uh, connect those stories to the mission, connect the mission and the stories to the outcomes of the great work that you're doing. So it is really important that you know your mission better than anyone else. That just again will boost your confidence. Like, there won't be any hesitation in your delivery of that information. You won't do a lot of ums or
Mhm.
so really just know it and
Yeah,
practice it.
and
I'm one of the first to say ick to role playing conversations, but I do know that when I have invested time in role playing scenarios and delivering messages and missions, that it's been really beneficial and definitely boosted my confidence in
yeah.
doing so.
Tony, listening to you say that, it makes me think that for those in our sector who are getting new jobs, who are getting promotions, this is just a great place to start, right?
Hmm.
As opposed to trying to navigate that time spent and hopefully absorbing that, really leaning in from the get-go as to what those points are, and to your point, role playing and being able to speak, that could just like amp you up in a way, really quickly.
Yeah, and I also think authenticity is important in this
Mhm.
conversation, Julia, because when you it's not just knowing the mission, but knowing how to deliver it in an authentic way, so it really doesn't sound like you're just spewing some script that you've read.
Mhm.
So I just want to point out that your authenticity in delivering these messages, whether
Mhm.
it be about the mission of the organization or the outcomes of the great work, your authenticity and just embracing your authenticity and doing that is also a great way to build your self-esteem.
Right. I think when you said that, I think of that tool. I'll never forget the time. I'll never forget the time I saw a child who had gone for the weekend without eating. I
Mm-hmm.
realized that, and that they needed help throughout the weekend and they weren't getting it at school. Things like that that help you to pull the story back in and to make it more personal. And I like what you said, I think, and more genuine. Let's talk more about problem solving. This seems to be something that I don't want to say is new, but I hear more and more nonprofit leaders talking about this, knowing what your organization is doing to solve a problem, not just, oh, we're here to, help people that need it,
Mm-hmm.
but we're here to solve a problem. How do you see that play? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, this is a really good conversation, and I think the way that you queued this up, Julie, it's like of course, fundraising professionals do this, right? I mean, they know what your organization is doing, and they know the problems that they're trying to solve. This is where when we talk about, in my opinion, this is where we talk about things like what is the real value proposition of the
Yes.
organization to the community. Uh, And that value proposition will all often include kind of, what are you doing? Excuse me. And again, what is the impact or the outcomes of, of that work?
Mhm.
When you are talking to a potential donor or investor, you are asking them a lot of questions so you can also understand what are their passion points, what are the things that they're most concerned about, and then connecting those with your programs and services, and then looping in the outcomes of those programs and services.
Mhm.
Uh, again, just being well prepared with that knowledge,
Mhm.
uh, and timeliness. So I think it's important that you're reviewing this data at least weekly. Just if it hasn't changed, great. But if it has changed, then But just to make sure that whatever you're sharing on a daily basis is the latest and greatest when it comes to exactly what your organization is doing to solve a problem, why it matters, and what that looks like.
I love that you brought up the whole metrics aspect, because we know this to be the case, that this next generation of donors, they're not just falling for a sob story. They want to know the metrics. They want to know the data. Doesn't mean that you are always successful, but they're this is the way their minds work, right? And so I
Mhm.
love that you brought that up. I think that's like one of those things. Talk about building confidence, or talk about disrupting confidence. Because if you have a donor that like leans into that, and you're not able to articulate even what
Mhm.
data metrics that your organization uses, that's got to be really, like, literally frightening, because you just be sitting there going, I don't know. The
Yeah,
worst.
yeah, that does not build confidence.
No, it does not. It really doesn't.
Well, and to your point, Julia, I'm seeing this more and more. You will see nonprofit organizations in their value propositions saying things like $250 will feed a family of four for a week. $500 will ensure that a family of six has a safe place to stay for
Right,
3 nights, or whatever that is. So
right.
when we talk about a new generation of donors, to your point, and what is important to them, I'm seeing a lot more of that kind of messaging that really speaks very specifically to a
Yes.
certain donation amount will have a very definite result and outcome for the betterment of the community.
Right. And Tony, I think it's where we should be,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I think this is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So when along those lines, we're talking about then more than stories. And it used to be, for a long time, I'm going to call it out. It was all about who could tell the more powerful story. Storytelling, storytelling. I mean, my goodness, there are conferences and classes just about how to tell your story. And now it's not necessarily just that sob story. It's about the actual nuts and bolts behind the programming. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's good. I think it's really good, actually. But I think this is going to be hard for some organizations, because they might not really have all these numbers at their fingertips, or used to be working with donors in this way.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. I mean, I'm sure the data is readily available, whether it's there, whether they can
Mhm.
just press a button and get a report, or whether they have to spend a little more time data mining to get to the actual truth of the data. I
Mhm.
was making some notes, and to support this, I would say things like, when you are telling more than stories, when you're talking about costs of programming, and then you're sharing with your donors that you really are critical thinkers, and that
Mhm.
there's a lot of strategy built into your programs. And so we we get the heart glow from the stories, but then we have to make sure that they they, meaning our donors or investors, also understand that, one, we are great stewards of their gift and their investment, and a part of being a great steward is that they understand exactly how it's being used. And that's not something that you're going to necessarily put in a story. That's something you're going to share with them, either through explaining your budget needs or what the long-term goals are for the organization, and sharing program costs.
Mm-hmm. I love that you brought that up, because I think that, to me, stewardship it's got to replace the word storytelling. Right? I mean, because I love what you just said. I think that's really powerful. See, this is why you are a national thought leader.
Oh, well, thank you.
Because you're right. What does it cost to do this work?
Mm-hmm.
It's not free. And sometimes if you don't understand what the real problem is, or you've never faced this, as a donor or philanthropic investor, you might need a little education on what it takes, how much it costs. And
Mm-hmm.
having that, being able to share that, is super powerful. I also think that when you're meeting with a donor and you can say, $500 will feed a family of, 4 for a week, it's easy to say, only one family. Well, I want to do, if I double my donation, I can feed 2 families. And if I triple it, I can feed 3 families. I mean, I think it comes back to the donor sensibility of what they can budget and what they're willing, in some cases, to stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that is something that will build your confidence like nothing else as a fundraiser. When you see that light go off in that donor's eyes, it says, holy moly, I can be part of the solution. It's very magical to me, I have to say.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The other thing that I was thinking through this part of the conversation is that we have, the nuances, and making sure that folks are very clear. Of course, the big win as fundraisers is when we get unrestricted dollars. It's like,
Yes.
woohoo, we got this money and we can invest it however we feel is appropriate for the organization to deliver its mission. So when we see some of those campaigns that say $250 will feed a family of 4, to me, that, now that is a restricted gift, right?
Okay.
If somebody's going to give that money very specifically to feed a family of 4.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to kind of be mindful too around that messaging, and whether that sends a message of restricted or unrestricted usage.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because you're absolutely right. And you used the word authenticity in the beginning of our conversation, but that's being disingenuous if you're not representing exactly where those funds are going to go. Yeah, so thank you for kind of cracking the whip. Okay, let's talk about this next issue, which is kind of an interesting aspect, and that's there's a shift. There's a mindset shift that we need to have, I think, in our ask process, when we're going before donors. And to me, the confident fundraiser understands this.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that you are offering a donor an opportunity to simply, and not so simply, activate change.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a really cool way to go before a donor.
It's very cool. And so when we think about like impact selling, and we think of that cycle, the
Yeah.
prospecting, the pre-approach, and those steps that are used in for-profit sales cycles.
Yep.
And and I know sometimes when we have conversations around cause selling or impact selling, sometimes fundraisers are like, well, I'm not selling. You are. And I think that this slide and this part of the conversation really supports that. And to your point, you're selling like a solution to a community need.
Yeah.
That is what you are selling. You are selling a solution for a community need, and that is part of the conversation that you're having with your potential donor, and investor, and that can feel empowering. Mm-hmm. So, going back to the core theme of today's conversation, building your self-esteem, that's really empowering. If I'm going to sit in front of someone and share our mission and the outcomes of our work, and then I'm going to say, if you support this mission, you are going to be part of the solution to this community need.
Yeah,
That's pretty powerful.
it is. And I think, Tony, when you phrase it that way, I think you build the confidence of the donor to be a longer term participant,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I think it's like this isn't going to get solved overnight. That's why we need people to march with us, and we need
Mm-hmm.
people to understand that they're activating change, and it's going to take some time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that's part of the power of getting people on board versus that arm twisting. Okay, I'll do it, and then you haven't really engaged them, right?
Right.
And so I think this is, part and parcel to that. Really an interesting way to be thinking about this. Let's talk about the answer NO.
No.
There is no, there's only KNOW.
Well, I remember on one of our shows, Julia, I think I had said something like, the answer is always no if you never ask the question.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, that is great.
right, the
Oh,
answer is always no if you never ask the question. Uh, and so I think when we talk about confidence in this space, you're going to hear no. And I think we talked about this. I think, Julia, this is my 120th show on the nonprofit show. So I'm thinking way back to maybe 6 years ago. I can't believe we've been engaged so long in this. Thank you for keeping me around.
no.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh, see, I lost my train of thought. I just lost all my confidence. Yeah.
The actual aspect of no, if you don't ask, it's
Oh,
always going to be a no.
and it's very easy, especially for folks that are newer to this work, to take it really really
Yeah.
personal. Uh,
Yeah.
but you can't. I think your obligation to yourself and to your nonprofit when you hear no is to do what you can to understand why the answer was no. Is it no because the timing's not, is it, again, not right now, but maybe later?
Right.
Is it no because it's just the wrong time of year? Is it no because they're not connected to the mission? So instead of being like, oh, I got to know, empower yourself to say, okay, well, let me figure out why they said no, and let me learn this, learn from this, and uh, treat this like a learning opportunity
I
when
agree.
someone says no to an ask to donate or invest in your organization. I think that can
So,
be empowering.
along those lines, is it ever appropriate, or have you ever done this when somebody says no? Is it appropriate for you as a fundraiser to say, is this a no for right now, or can I reconnect with you? So that we can measure that, the veracity and the strength of that no. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I would do, again, so many nuances. So depending on, on the potential donor or investor, if they're like, no, then you're like, okay, then maybe this just isn't a good fit. But you could say, well, thank you for taking the time. If it's okay with you, I would still like to, in a few months or maybe at the end of next quarter, just send you some information on some of our impact and some of the results of what we're doing, because through the course of our conversation and getting to know each other, you seem passionate about the work that we're doing. So I'd love to be able to just keep you informed on what's happening and how we're living up to our promise to the community that we're serving.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a great way to go. I think that's also, something that you might be building a champion of your organization in a way that you hadn't anticipated. Early in my community career, and I always want to make sure that everybody knows that I've never been a paid fundraiser. I've been a community fundraiser. and engaged, without being paid, without being professionally trained. But I did, on behalf of a board I served on, was very privileged to attend the great Terry Axelrod Raising More Money, and then ultimately Benavon was her company's name.
Right.
And she taught me this amazing phrase that I still use, and it's bless and release.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, this might not be a good fit, okay, but thank you for what you do in our community, what you can do, and maybe you can arrange an introduction to something else, right? Or someone else, but not to sour somebody and build a new prejudice against the process of fundraising. Because if somebody has a negative experience with one of us, it's with all of us in a lot of ways, right?
Absolutely.
And that's a confidence issue, right? I mean, that's like, we need to be confident that we are doing the right thing for our communities. Might not be the right fit.
Right.
Okay. But we know that our problem needs to be solved, and that we need to get people marching with us. So yeah, that's my soapbox.
No, I agree with you. And we've talked about that too. Our responsibility to be really good stewards of the sector. And like you said, if it's not a good fit for our organization, then let's still lift them up in the fact that were willing to have conversations and that they want to participate in philanthropy, and then recommend organizations or do an introduction to an organization that might be a better fit. That's very empowering. Yeah. And you can walk away feeling really good about your work in the sector when you're doing that kind of outreach above and beyond what you're doing for your own organization.
I agree. And I think, Tony, that's the right way to live. That's a good value.
For sure.
I mean, because you might have come across a donor investor that will make a transformational gift to another organization down the road that they might never have known. They might never have had that opportunity. And so absolutely, that to me, I think is a great way to go. Well, it's always a great way to go when I get to have a Friday with the amazing Tony Beall. If you like the conversation that we've had, I'm going to invite you to pick up a copy of The Architecture of Fundraising. This is a collaborative book that Tony and I wrote together, and it's all about building a career, developing your relationships with donors, and structuring success. How do you structure your success? You don't just, like, for most of us, fall into it, right? No, it takes practice. It takes a strategy, and it takes grit. And so I just love that we have this opportunity to connect with people who watch the show and then maybe want more, or maybe need to hear those voices in their head. So The Architecture of Fundraising, you can find it on Amazon. It's $19.99. If you've got questions or concerns, reach out to us. You can connect with us at info@americannonprofitacademy.com. We're both very active on LinkedIn. Definitely connect with us there, and we would love to hear and know what it is you're thinking and what it is that's going on in your part of the world. Tony, we had an amazing guest on from Bloomerang this week, who's just released some fascinating research that they did along with the Harris Poll Company. So a major piece of research. And they found that there are tremendous and documented and measured differences in the regions of our country when it comes to donors and what donors are thinking and how donors want to be spoken to. I think most of us would say, well, yeah, but I mean, they've drilled down to very specific things. And so this is a really important part of the conversation that we have. We get to have these conversations day in and day out because we have amazing partners: Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, JMT Consulting, Third Sector Company, and Your Part-Time Controller. They are our presenting sponsors and make all the difference in the world. Tony, I know you're going to skedaddle out for a little weekend getaway to revive, regenerate, and I wish you a happy weekend.
I'm wishing you the same, Julia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. We end each and every episode with this message, and it goes like this: to stay well so you can do well.